The woman was about to take a taxi home, when suddenly something seemed to happen. The driver slammed the brakes, and when the woman regained consciousness, she found herself surrounded by darkness. She lifted her head to look around, and discovered walls of copper and iron all around. This terrified the woman. Was she being held captive? Thinking this, she quickly followed along the wall to find an exit. However, there was nothing except a tightly locked small door. Fearfully, the woman called for help loudly from outside, but despite shouting for a while, there was no response. It seemed she could only rely on herself to get out alive. Time was of the essence, so she began to hit the small door with her arms, but the thick metal plate was of no use against her efforts. As she continued to hit it, she suddenly noticed a hidden door above. The woman immediately got up and tried to push it open, but the space was too small to exert force. Just then, she glanced at the extra iron ring on her wrist. It was shining, possibly hiding some mechanism. She tried to remove it forcefully, but the lock was too tight to budge. So, she started rubbing the iron ring against the wall, hoping to take it off this way. However, even after leaving a mark on the wall, the bracelet remained unchanged. Despair filled her eyes as she saw this. She knew that with her own strength alone, escaping might be impossible. While the woman was leaning against the wall in the corner, not knowing what to do, she suddenly heard a dripping sound from beneath the floor. She crawled over to investigate, but to her surprise, the iron door that was tightly shut just moments ago had opened on its own. Seeing this, she stood dumbstruck, and behind the iron door, an endless corridor appeared. It seemed eerie and terrifying, as if something was hidden within. However, faced with the door she had managed to open, the woman was determined not to give up. Without a second thought, she climbed up to see if she could escape. Unfortunately, as soon as she entered the corridor, the iron door closed automatically. It was as if all of this had been meticulously designed by someone. With no other option, the woman had to crawl forward along the corridor. She wanted to reach the illuminated area ahead to see if it was an exit. However, after crawling for a short distance, an iron plate blocked her path. Anxious, she hastened her pace, but unfortunately, she was still a step too late. Fortunately, she noticed a hidden passage next to the iron plate. She tried to squeeze through, and luckily, she just managed to fit. Although it was tight, at least she saw a glimmer of hope. After some effort, she finally made it through. Upon arriving, she saw another dark stretch of corridor ahead. Carefully, she used the bracelet to light her way as she crawled forward. Before long, she reached a forked entrance that split vertically. This was a dilemma for her, given her indecisiveness. After comparing the two options, she realized the upper passage seemed wider. Determined, she chose to climb into it. Once inside, she found the surroundings more spacious and easier than before. However, she hadn't crawled far when alarms started blaring around her. Soon after, the iron plate beneath her began to rise slowly. Terrified, she desperately crawled forward, but the space was shrinking. Her movements became restricted, and her speed slowed down. Before long, she was almost immobilized due to the constriction. Luckily, at a critical moment, she reached the exit, grabbing onto the edge of the iron plate, and pulling with all her might. She successfully escaped. Having narrowly escaped, the exhausted woman collapsed to the ground, utterly drained. Just as she contemplated taking a moment to rest, she suddenly noticed the screen on her bracelet lighting up. In an instant, a countdown appeared. Without a chance to rest, she quickly got up and continued crawling forward, dragging her fatigued body. She didn't know what terrifying ordeal awaited her once the countdown ended. However, as she crawled, a metal door suddenly blocked her path. Leaving her in distress, she rushed over to try to pry the door open, but at that moment, the iron ring on her wrist emitted a red light, followed by a 1-minute countdown. Terrified, she contemplated retracing her steps, only to realize that the passage behind her was already equipped with red fire nozzles. She felt trapped, struggling to muster a final effort. Suddenly, she heard a sound from behind. Turning around, she saw a safe room materializing out of thin air. Overwhelmed with excitement, she hurriedly retreated and dashed toward it, managing to slip inside with a roll. Simultaneously, the countdown on the iron ring concluded, and the passage was instantly consumed by intense flames. Frightened, she remained still within the safe room. As the outside inferno eventually subsided, the wall-mounted sensors retracted. She knew she had miraculously survived another ordeal, exhaling a sigh of relief and wanting to lie down for a well-deserved rest. However, just as she thought the glass door was securely shut, it unexpectedly opened, and the iron plate within started pushing outward. Before she could react, she was once again sent back into the corridor. Simultaneously, the iron plate above the passage began to lower slowly. The woman attempted to resist, but she was utterly powerless. Closing her eyes, she braced herself for the arrival of death. Unexpectedly, the iron plate stopped halfway, leaving a small gap that trapped her. Unsure whether to be relieved or cry, she feared the continued torment would break her. However, this survival game seemed to have only just begun. The countdown appeared once again on her bracelet screen. It seemed that her only chance at survival was to persist. With this realization, she looked ahead, and the iron door that had blocked her path was now open once more. Slowly shifting her body, she continued onward. Since she was facing upward, she could hardly see the path ahead, and had to rely on her hands to explore before daring to move. As she proceeded, her hand suddenly touched something, startling her to recoil. However, When she brought her hand to her mouth and tasted it, she realized it was clear water. This discovery excited her greatly. Thirsty and desperate, she immediately cupped water in her hands and brought it to her lips. Unfortunately, she hadn't taken more than a few sips when the countdown on her bracelet reminded her that time was running out. Taking a deep breath, she submerged herself in the water and used the bracelet's light to locate the next exit. Just as she emerged, a horrifying sight unfolded. The path ahead suddenly rushed downward, filling with water. The narrow space was quickly submerged. The woman managed to hold her breath in the nick of time, surfacing. Although she had gained another chance at life, she was almost devoid of energy. Finding a spot, she curled up, intending to rest. However, just as she was about to drift off, she suddenly heard a man's voice calling out. This instantly snapped her awake. Could there be someone else here besides herself? Thinking this, she quickly set off in the direction of the voice. Perhaps finding this person could lead to a way out. Yet, as she crawled, the iron plate beneath her suddenly cracked open, releasing a cloud of steam and a pool of green water. She tore off her clothes and dipped them in for a test, only to watch them corrode instantly. She understood that the path ahead would be even more treacherous. However, for the sake of survival, she had no choice but to continue onward. The woman propped her limbs against the iron plates on either side and began to crawl forward. This method of propulsion was quite laborious. Deciding to take advantage of her agility, she quickly made it to the other side. Unexpectedly, her foot slipped and she fell through the gap on the ground. Despite the pain, she lay on the ground, forcing a smile. Although it hurt, at least she was still alive. Meanwhile, the voices from a distance were getting closer. Without time to rest, she hurried forward. Finally, she found the man who had been speaking in one of the pipes. However, they were separated by an iron door and couldn't physically meet. The man seemed to be on the verge of a mental breakdown due to the torment he had endured. Just as she was about to offer comfort, she noticed her bracelet turn red. Soon after, fiery jets appeared above their respective pipes. A new safe house opened between them, indicating a deadly competition. The partnership they had just been considering turned into a rivalry. Both struggled to enter the safe house, and after a brief scuffle, the woman, with her longer legs, managed to kick the man out. The survival contest came to an end as the countdown reached 0, and flames engulfed the area as expected. The woman covered her ears in fear and dared not look, only emerging once the fire was fully extinguished. The man's bracelet was pushed toward her by an iron plate. When she picked it up and looked at it, she noticed a few symbols underneath. Just as she pondered their meaning, a terrifying scene unfolded ahead. A massive fan was rapidly approaching her. Frightened, she quickly retreated, but the fan was gaining speed and was close to catching up. Fortunately, she managed to crawl up into the pipe just in time. Although she narrowly avoided danger, the experience left her breathless. After a brief rest, she prepared to continue. However, as she got up, she saw that the pipe ahead was filled with wires, and beyond those wires was a clear blue sky with white clouds. Just then, her bracelet started beeping again, and the fire jets around the pipe activated. The woman knew that her final moment had arrived. Ignoring the wire cuts on her body, she crawled forward with determination, trying to escape this last trial and leave this place. However, the wires were numerous, and by the time she made it through, her body was covered in wounds. The pain gradually caused her to lose consciousness. She could see the light ahead, but she had no strength left. The countdown had reached 0, and a wall of flames was about to engulf her. Unexpectedly, the floor beneath her suddenly opened up, and she fell through. After an unknown period, she woke up from unconsciousness. Struggling to lift her body, she noticed the scratches she had left on the wall from the beginning. She realized she had ended up back where she had started. Feeling heartbroken, she lay on the ground in despair, wondering why survival had to be so difficult. With the intention to give up, she regretted not understanding the meaning of the symbols on the man's bracelet. Using her last bit of strength, she wrote the symbols on the wall, and then lay down to await death. However, as she laid down, she witnessed an astonishing scene. The symbol broke in the middle, forming left and right arrows. This revelation excited her. Each person's bracelet held directions for their route. With newfound determination, the woman continued. Following the path indicated by her symbol, she quickly reached the green pool. Without hesitation, she plunged her bracelet into the water, and it quickly melted away. Retrieving her symbol, she followed its guidance without obstacles. Soon, she found another exit with a clear sky. Excitedly, she increased her speed, but suddenly, a descending iron blade blocked her way. As she examined it, she noticed that 3 iron blades were continuously appearing behind her. This final challenge was a true test of life and death. Victory was within her reach, and she refused to give up. She focused on the speed of the iron blades, waiting until the last moment to dash forward when they retracted. The first 2 blades descended slowly, and she passed through effortlessly. However, the speed of the final blade increased significantly. She knew that surviving this challenge was nearly impossible, but with the exit so close, she chose to make a desperate attempt. Though she was cut, she made it through, laughing happily at the blue sky and white clouds ahead. Exhausted, she thought she could finally escape. However, after laboring to reach What she thought was the exit, she realized it was just a screen. As the screen turned darker, she felt her despair overwhelming her. Collapsing on the ground, she was ready to give up. Even with all the reluctance, there was nothing she could do. The fire jets on the wall began to ignite, and she closed her eyes, preparing to accept her fate. But instead of fire, everything suddenly went dark. Surprised, she opened her eyes, and saw a crack forming in the pipe above her. Light shone down on her face, and her body started floating upwards. The next time she woke up, she found herself miraculously back on land. All her efforts hadn't been in vain after all.